Number 9. Cold feet leads to condolences. While studying abroad in Connecticut in 2012, a young British woman named Alex Lanchester met and fell in love with a man named Tucker Blandford. What initially seemed like a fling that would end when Alex returned to Britain led to a long-term relationship between the two. Blandford proposed and Alex readily obliged. The bride-to-be planned out all the details. She bought a dress, hired a photographer, bought invitations, and paid for plane tickets so Blandford could fly to Britain and help with final preparations. But the wedding plans ground to a halt a week before his planned travel date when Alex received a call from a man claiming to be Tucker's father, saying that her fiancé had fatally crashed his own car in the throes of a mental breakdown. She called Blandford's parents to offer her condolences, and they told her that their son was fine and that there had been no accident. They were under the impression that Tucker had broken up with Alex when she returned to Britain after her studies and were unaware of the wedding plans. While no legal consequences came out of the situation, Tucker's dishonesty caused a lot of needless emotional suffering to Alex and a lot of avoidable embarrassment to himself. He admitted that he lied about taking his own life to get out of the relationship, while sparing himself the discomfort of just breaking up with Alex. After making international headlines for it, hopefully he learned that sometimes it really is easier just to break up. Number 8. Mid-arrest mayhem. Late one night in 2022, a burglar later identified as 35-year-old Lynette Valdeo threw potted plants at the home of a single mother in Birmingham, England. Then he barged inside, demanding money. The woman fought back, but the intruder kept pushing his way in, punching and biting her in an attempt to overpower her. Luckily, the victim managed to break free and alerted the neighbors, who called the police. As two female officers took the alleged thief into custody, he assaulted one of them and violently resisted. During the ride to the police station, the suspect verbally abused the cops and headbutted one of them, leaving her with a busted lip. Valdeo admitted to robbery, criminal damage, and 3 assault-related charges and was sentenced to 9 years in prison. Due to the nature of his crimes, his supervision will continue after his release. Number 7. The kidnapping of Quinn Gray. Reed Gray arrived at his $4 million seaside home in Ponte Vedra, Florida one day in 2009 to find a troubling note left behind by his wife Quinn. It said that she had been kidnapped and instructed him to stay at home, to not involve the cops, and to cooperate with the abductor's demand for a $50,000 ransom. 3 days later, Quinn appeared in a parking lot in a seemingly inconsolable state. She accused a 25-year-old gas station employee, Jasmine Osmanovich, of holding her hostage at a motel room. The hotel manager remembered Quinn and told police that she didn't seem distressed during her stay, and when investigators interviewed Osmanovich, he had recordings of his interactions with Quinn that proved the two were entangled in a steamy affair, and that Quinn had conspired with him to stage her own kidnapping in an attempt to extort Reed Gray. Reed stood by his wife at first, laying most of the blame on Osmanovich and excusing Quinn based on her compromised mental state. But he eventually saw the situation for what it was and filed for divorce from his wife while she and Osmanovich went to court for extortion charges. Osmanovich pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 6 months of probation. Quinn pleaded no contest and received 7 years of probation, and they were each ordered to pay $43,000 to cover the cost of the taxpayer dollars that were wasted on police resources. Number 6. The kidnapping of Eduardo Garcia Valseca. In 2007, a group of masked men ambushed Jane Rager and her husband, Eduardo Garcia Valseca, at gunpoint along a roadside in the small Mexican town of San Miguel de Allende. The men let Jane go, but they took Eduardo to an undisclosed location where he was kept in a tiny wooden box with no light, blaring music, and a bucket to use as a toilet. He endured routine beatings, torture, and starvation, while his abductors attempted to collect an $8 million ransom that Jane couldn't afford. Each time she failed to come up with the money, the kidnappers sent her horrifying photos of the injuries they inflicted on her emaciated husband. Meanwhile, Jane tried to maintain a sense of normalcy at home for the sake of her and Eduardo's 3 children, but it was impossible to do with an intelligence agent now staying with them, and after realizing that the household was under constant surveillance by the criminals. After finally agreeing on a ransom amount, two of the employees who worked at Jane and Eduardo's ranch went to deliver it. Only one of them returned. The other worker had been kidnapped, and the ransom demands resumed. 8 grueling months after Eduardo was taken, he showed up at the house. Weighing just 90 pounds, 41 kilograms, he was weak, skeletal, and barely recognizable, and he was mentally traumatized. The ransom negotiations for the employee's return continued, and he was eventually freed, but the abductors remained at large, and they made it clear that the family was in danger as long as they continued to live in the area. Left with no other choice, Jane and Eduardo left their beloved ranch and moved to the United States. Jane passed away in 2012, and it wasn't until 2018 that a man named Ricardo Palma Salamanca was arrested for masterminding an eerily similar abduction to Eduardo's. To add insult to injury, Eduardo recognized Salamanca as a trustee of the school he and Jane had founded back in Mexico, someone the family knew and trusted, and would have never suspected of being his kidnapper. The abductions have stopped since Salamanca's arrest, indicating that he was most likely responsible for what happened to Eduardo. Since then, Eduardo and his kids have rebuilt their lives in the US, but they'll never forget having everything ripped out from beneath them and having to start over from scratch. Number 5. Woman kicks cop during traffic stop. Early one morning in 2022, police in Struthers, Ohio, observed a vehicle with one headlight out driving erratically at high speed. After seeing the car almost hit a curb a few times, officers pulled the driver over. As one of the cops approached 31-year-old Miranda Fairchild, she allegedly began yelling at him and refused to stop, even as he tried to tell her why she was being stopped. She was later accused of punching the officer through her open car window, prompting the police to call for backup. According to an arrest report, Fairchild continued to resist arrest even after more officers arrived, kicking one of them in the thigh and groin. Once the cops finally got her under control, they took her in and booked her for resisting arrest, driving with a suspended or revoked license, and felony assault on a police officer. Number 4. An early end to an early retirement. As part of their plan to retire early and leave the California coast, Tom and Jackie Hawkes put their yacht, the Well-Deserved, up for sale in 2004. A young couple, Skylar and Jennifer DeLeon, contacted them to set up a viewing and test drive. Tom and Jackie were never seen or heard from again after that, yet the Well-Deserved returned, and Skylar and Jennifer appeared to have taken ownership of it. Hoping that Tom and Jackie had gone on an impromptu trip, but fearing the worst, relatives reported the pair missing. Authorities found no evidence of foul play on the Well-Deserved, but they remained suspicious of the DeLeons, who told investigators they bought the boat with cash. Detectives became even more concerned to discover that Tom and Jackie had apparently given Skylar power of attorney over their assets and money. Skylar claimed it was because he was trying to help the couple secure a vacation home in Mexico. The documents were notarized and signed by a witness, and by all appearances seemed legit. But the Hawkes' loved ones just knew something was amiss, and that the missing couple would have never signed their hard-earned assets over to 2 young adults they had just met. Police agreed, and their suspicions were confirmed when Tom and Jackie's SUV was found in Mexico. The person using it said it was a gift from Skylar DeLeon. A search of the DeLeon's home turned up personal property that the Hawkes' would have never given away. The notary admitted she had backdated the power of attorney documents and wasn't actually there when they were signed, but the witness who signed them, Alonzo Machane, was there at the time. In exchange for avoiding the death penalty, he told police about how he joined the DeLeons for the test drive of the boat. Once they were out at sea, Skylar and another accomplice, John F. Kennedy, forced the Hawkes to sign the documents. Then they chained the couple to the anchor and threw it overboard, killing them in one of the cruelest ways imaginable. Alonzo Machane received a 20-year sentence, and Jennifer DeLeon was sentenced to life without parole. Skylar DeLeon and John Kennedy were condemned to death, but because California has a moratorium on the death penalty and is expected to abolish it, they'll probably serve life. Either way, they're exactly where they belong. Number 3. Accident cover-up goes awry. After 21-year-old Khadija Sena reported her vehicle stolen in Las Cruces, New Mexico in 2017, police began to suspect that she wasn't giving them the full story. An investigation found that just hours earlier, she called for help at a construction area along a freeway. Her car had been in an accident and was covered in dirt. It was bad enough that Sena got into an accident to begin with, but now she faced a whole new set of problems. Instead of receiving an insurance payout like she probably hoped for, the situation ended up costing her a considerable amount of money in the form of bail. After locating the crashed car's whereabouts, authorities charged her with filing a false report to a peace officer and perjury. Number 2. Hostage victim accused of faking it. In 2015, two masked intruders held credit union executive Matt Yusman and his mother hostage at their Bristol, Connecticut home. They strapped a device around Matt's chest, claiming it was a C4 bomb with a timer attached, and ordered him to drive to his workplace and rob it while they stayed behind with his mother. If he failed to get the money by a certain time, the bomb would explode. Matt called his boss and told him to wait with the vault combination and not to call the police. But his boss called the police and they surrounded Matt in the credit union parking lot. A bomb squad arrived to remove the device from his chest just minutes before it was supposedly scheduled to detonate. It turned out to be fake, and once the intruders found out the police were involved, they fled the scene, leaving Matt's mother physically unharmed. It wasn't long before law enforcement and Matt's work superiors began to suspect him of staging the entire ordeal for money, based on their belief that he was a problem gambler and because he performed poorly during parts of a polygraph, something his lawyer attributed to the trauma he had just endured. They also found it odd how his mother, Valerie, described the intruders as polite and gentlemanlike. Matt was put on leave from his job and faced possible legal consequences, turning his life into a living hell for the next year, until finally the FBI connected the crime to similar incidents that were happening around the country. Most of the victims worked at banks and had enough personal information posted on social media for the culprits to figure out where they lived and observe their daily routines before making a move. Authorities cleared Matt of any wrongdoing and nabbed the suspects, convicted felons Brian Whittam and Michael Benanti. The ex-cons had met while serving prison time together for previous cases. Benanti was convicted of 23 federal charges and was sentenced to 4 life terms plus 155 years, and Whittam received a 42-year sentence in exchange for his testimony against Benanti. Number 1. Falsely convicted former lawman. Former Indiana State Trooper David Cam was horrified to arrive home one evening in 2000 and find his wife Kim and their 2 children murdered in their garage. He hadn't been the best husband, but his world fell apart when he lost his family. Unfortunately, his philandering ways quickly put him at the top of the suspect list, and the law enforcement officers he once served with were now accusing him of murdering the 3 most important people in his life in order to avoid the responsibilities of marriage and fatherhood. David adamantly maintained his innocence, and there was evidence at the scene that someone else was the culprit, including a sweatshirt that didn't belong to anyone in the family. But he was nevertheless charged with murder and was found guilty. He languished in prison for the next 13 years, while he continued to fight his case and won a second trial, but was convicted again. David won a 3rd trial, by which point his lawyer had ensured that the DNA on the mysterious sweatshirt was tested. It matched to a violent convicted felon named Charles Boney. Instead of accepting that Boney had acted alone, prosecutors now claimed that he and David Cam had co-conspired to commit the murders, while Boney's defense attorney claimed his client was set up by David. Finally, David Cam was acquitted and fully exonerated of any wrongdoing, and Boney was convicted and sentenced to 225 years in prison. David was relieved to finally be found innocent, and he won $4.6 million in a lawsuit against the state of Indiana. But it doesn't bring back his family or erase the trauma of being falsely accused of killing them. He's also stuck dealing with the fact that a lot of people remain convinced that he was involved and openly despise him. In other words, even after a hard-fought victory, the consequences of the tragedy will follow him around for the rest of his life.
Accidental Javelin murder. On July 16, 1983, Liz Cashin accidentally killed her friend Samantha Atherton. The teenage girls were attending the Wirral Grammar School for Girls in Bebington when the accidental murder took place. They'd been throwing javelins as part of sports day. Everything was going fine, the kids were having fun, and then the day took a very dark turn. Liz threw the javelin straight up in the air. It began to make its descent, but then it veered sharply to the right. Her friend Samantha had offered to mark the distance, meaning she needed to be near the end where the javelin would land to mark how far it went. However, she'd gotten distracted and wasn't paying attention. Everyone else saw the javelin coming straight for her head, but Samantha was looking in the other direction. People screamed her name. Samantha turned and looked up, but it was too late. The javelin impacted Samantha just above her left eye, impaling her skull. Samantha had lost consciousness and was taken to the hospital, but she never recovered. She died 4 days later, and Liz Chasin has been living with the trauma of that horrible day at school ever since. 9. Looking for frisbees. At the end of May in 2022, a man searching for frisbees along a lakeshore in Florida was discovered dead. Authorities say he was killed in an apparent alligator attack. Largo police identified the victim as 47-year-old Sean Thomas McGinnis. They say his body was discovered at Taylor Lake. This is not a lake anyone should be swimming at. There are multiple signs posted all around the water warning people not to go swimming. The issue here is that the lake is crawling with alligators. The victim not only combed the edges of the water looking for frisbees, but waded into the water to see if he could find any. To make matters worse, this happened on a Monday night. The victim waded into alligator-infested water when it was dark, and he had poor visibility, meaning he wouldn't have been able to see any alligators coming toward him. His body was only discovered the next day by a dog walker at around 8 a.m. 8. Coffee in Japan. Aika Doheny from County Kilkenny in Ireland was a young girl in her 20s. She traveled to Japan for vacation early in 2022. It was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime, halfway around the world to the mystical land of Japan, to visit some family and see some amazing tourist sites. But then everything went horribly wrong. She drank a coffee in the capital of Tokyo and dropped dead. It's unclear what exactly happened, but it had something to do with soya. Aika drank what was believed to have been a soya-based coffee, and it gave her an allergic reaction. It wasn't as if this was her first time drinking coffee, but there was something in the Japanese coffee that her body reacted poorly to. An EpiPen was administered to treat the allergic reaction, but it only provided limited relief. She was whisked away to the nearest hospital, remained in the intensive care unit, and was then flown back to Ireland in an air ambulance. But when she arrived at the St. James Hospital in Dublin, she was pronounced dead. Doheny was a former student at Presentation Secondary School and was pursuing her master's degree at the National University of Ireland at the time of her tragic end. 7. Deadly beach umbrella. A woman died in August of 2022 after she was hit by a beach umbrella. It happened in South Carolina in the area of Horry County during a particularly bad wind. The victim was Tammy Perrault, 63 years old. She was relaxing on the beach near a hotel when suddenly an umbrella was blown from the ground, through the air, and tumbled end over and across the beach until it struck Tammy on the left part of her upper torso. She was impaled by the umbrella shaft, which was propelled by the wind so violently it hit her as if someone had thrown it like a javelin. Tammy was transferred to a local hospital where she was sadly pronounced dead. The Horry County Deputy Coroner Dale Trevethan told CNN Tammy died from massive chest trauma caused by the umbrella. She was already gone before she even reached the hospital. 6. The world's dirtiest man. In the fall of 2022, the dirtiest man alive died, and it may have been because he took the first bath of his life. His name was Amu Haji, an Iranian hermit who earned the title World's Dirtiest Man after he refused to shower for over half a century. For more than 60 years, the hermit refused to touch water or soap. He lived in a dirty shack made from cinder blocks outside the village of Degja, located in the province of Fars. According to local villagers, he experienced emotional setbacks during his youth, which caused him to become a little strange. He refused to wash, and so he lived in his dirty shack covered in soot and grime for most of his adult life. At some point, Amu Haji became extremely unwell in his mind. In 2014, the Tehran Times did a report on him, claiming that he ate roadkill and smoked animal feces. He had a belief that any kind of cleanliness would be the death of him. He thought if he bathed or washed his hands, he would get sick and die. He was so obsessed with being filthy that he even smoked multiple cigarettes at once to pollute his lungs faster. But it was in 2022 when everything went wrong. Amu was 94 years old, and he finally agreed to let the villagers wash him for the very first time. He had a bath and was clean for the first time in over 6 decades, and then he dropped dead. While it looks like the man probably died of natural causes brought on by old age, there are rumors that he died from being given a bath. Some believe that if the dirtiest man alive had continued being filthy, he would still be alive right now. 5. Fighting at the nursing home. In August of 2021, a woman almost died from doing the milk crate challenge. A woman from Dallas was in critical condition after she failed to complete the popular challenge on social media and fell on her head. For those who missed this insanely dangerous challenge, it consisted of walking on milk crates. Milk crates would be stacked into a kind of pyramid, and then the challenger would have to climb to the peak then down the other side. The milk crates could be stacked as many as 7 or 8 high at the top, making the challenge extremely dangerous because of how unstable the milk crates are. The woman in Dallas was filmed doing the challenge outside of a gas station on La Prada Drive. She reached the top of the Great Pyramid, then the crates gave way underneath her and she fell and hit her head. The witnesses, who continued filming after the woman hit the ground, could be heard laughing in the footage as she lay motionless and bleeding. Thankfully, someone who wasn't involved saw what happened and phoned the police, and so the woman was taken to the hospital. There were initial reports that the woman had died, but Dallas Police Chief Eddie Garcia said those reports were false. However, it was really close. The woman fell on her head, split herself open, and nearly bled to death on the sidewalk in front of a gas station. 4. The Yukon backcountry. A 28-year-old man decided he was going to take a trip deep into the Yukon wilderness in the middle of the winter. The Yukon is one of the most dangerous territories in Canada. It's cold, isolated, and crawling with wildlife. If you get lost in the middle of Yukon territory, chances are you'll never make it out alive. The man's name was Evan Payne Russell, and his plan was to explore the wilderness on an extended trip starting in October 2021. He traveled with his friend Mitchell, and they disappeared together into the cold and snowy forest. Months went by and nobody heard from either man. Their families reached out to the local police, hoping they could launch a search party or at least give them some information on what happened. The police learned that the two men had wandered into the bush with little more than a tent, some gear, and a meager amount of supplies. And yet they'd been hoping to spend the entire winter in the forest. They also didn't leave their exact destination with anyone, so the police didn't know where to look. On June 25th, almost a year after the men were last seen, Mitchell was discovered barely alive in a remote area thanks to a rescue team and a helicopter. On July 1st, Evan Russell was discovered dead. They discovered the remains of a camp where it looked like he'd been trying to survive the winter months, and nearby a pile of human remains. No criminal cause was ever suspected in the death of Evan Russell. It appears he and his friend became separated as they tried desperately to survive, and Mitchell just got lucky that he was discovered first. Evan thought he could make it in the Yukon backcountry with nothing more than a tent and some gear, but sadly, that wasn't the case. 3. Air Compressor Brank. A 46-year-old Japanese man was killed by a lethal dose of air from an air compressor hose, which his co-worker inserted up his bottom. The Japanese workers were at a manufacturing plant in 2018 in Ibaraki, Tsukuba City when the incident occurred. The victim, Akio Ishimaru, was joking around with his younger colleague Yoshiyuka Yoshida. Yoshida thought it would be funny to blast some air up Akio's rear end, but then things took a turn for the worse. Just minutes after the stunt, Akio complained that he wasn't feeling very well. He'd become incredibly sick, had to be taken to the hospital, and he died from his injuries. His co-worker was then arrested even though it was just a stupid prank gone wrong. Yoshida told the police he had no idea an air compressor could kill someone. Here's how the death occurred. The air compressor hose was inserted between the older man's buttocks, and then wind was injected into his body. It didn't go directly into the cavity, of course, but it was shoved against Ika's pants. Still, the force delivered by the air compressor was enough that air shot through the victim's body, damaged his lungs, and injured his internal organs so badly that he was dead by the end of the day. We're not sure what happened to the co-worker who was arrested. The bizarre death made big headlines in 2018, but the story was never followed up on. We don't know if he's doing time in prison for murder or if he was let go because it was just a horrible prank gone wrong. 2. Swimming pool sinkhole. A man in Israel died in one of the worst and strangest ways imaginable. His name was Kami Yosef, only 25 years old, and he met his end at a pool party. It was summer of 2022, and Kami was attending a party at a couple's villa about 25 miles from Tel Aviv. Everything was going fine until a sinkhole suddenly formed at the bottom of their swimming pool and the man was sucked into it. The bottom of the pool gave way, creating a giant hole which acted kind of like a drain at the bottom of the bathtub. Just imagine being in an oversized bathtub when the drain is opened and all the water goes spiraling down. Kami got caught inside that whirlpool and was dragged down into the sinkhole below the floor of the pool. The owners of the house were placed under arrest by Israeli police. They were suspected of causing Kami's death by negligence. The sinkhole underneath the pool was so big it took emergency crews and the army to uncover Kami's body. 1. Cliff selfie. A man from New Delhi in India fell off a cliff in the summer of 2022. The 29-year-old individual was standing on a rocky outcrop near the famous Totagati temple in Uttarakhand when the incident occurred. He was with some friends and they'd stopped on the side of the highway, and the man then got dangerously close to the edge of the cliff to snap a photograph. He lifted his camera to take a selfie, lost his footing, and fell off the cliff to his death. His name was Dilip Mandal, and he's one of the most recent victims of death by selfie. According to the officials who dealt with the disaster, the victim was part of a friend group on vacation. 3 of them were going by car to Sonprayag when they stopped to take a break at the temple. Dilip Mandal's friends looked on in absolute horror as he slipped over the edge while taking the selfie and fell way down into the gorge. They had no time to react, not so much as a second to try and save their friend. Dilip's body was only recovered after a 2-hour-long operation by the State Disaster Response Force. And while his death was undoubtedly tragic and horrific, there was one silver lining. The only good thing is that he died immediately upon impact, so there wasn't any suffering involved. Still, his friends are in shock and the man's family is devastated. 13. Serial stowaway faces justice. For nearly 20 years, an American woman named Marilyn Hartman managed to defy airport security despite heightened post-9/11 measures, all for the sake of flying for free. After she started getting caught, CBS 2 investigators painstakingly traced her travels by examining records and conducting interviews. They discovered that she'd managed to travel to multiple cities around the US without purchasing a ticket, including Jacksonville, Seattle, Phoenix, Philadelphia, Atlanta, Minneapolis, and San Francisco. She also traveled internationally. In fact, Hartman first flew as a stowaway in plain sight to Copenhagen in 2002, and after that, she went to Paris. Speaking with CBS in 2021, she said that she first got caught in 2014 when she attempted to fly from San Jose to Los Angeles without paying. A judge warned Hartman not to do it again and let her go without any serious consequences. She was found incompetent to stand trial on another charge several months later, although she later contended that she was doing just fine mentally. By early 2015, Hartman had developed a reputation as a serial stowaway, but her brazen attempts to travel as an unauthorized passenger continued, and a lot of the time she still managed to pull it off. Her last success of flying as a stowaway came in 2018 when she traveled to London. Hartman told CBS that she got past security by following an employee with a blue bag, which gave off the impression that she was with the person. It worked so well that she was let through despite her picture being featured at certain airports to warn workers to look out for her. The fact that she looked like a harmless grandmother likely helped her attempts, since she didn't fit the profile of a typical stowaway. In her most telling interview to date, Hartman revealed that she wasn't just trying to save money. She said she suffers from bipolar disorder, and that whenever she snuck onto an airplane, she was experiencing a depressive episode. After being sentenced to probation twice in the US for her crimes, she was nabbed again in 2019, and the judge was far less forgiving this time. Unwilling to impose probation for a third time, the court sentenced Hartman to 3.5 years in prison for felony criminal trespass and escape from electronic monitoring. The 71-year-old was given credit for about 2.5 years of time served and will be eligible for release sometime in 2023. 12. A final attempt at freedom. As US forces began leaving Afghanistan in 2021 after a 20-year military presence in the country, desperate civilians clamored at the airport in hopes of escaping Taliban rule. One Air Force cargo plane was mobbed immediately upon landing, and its crew decided it would be more safe to take off again without unloading the cargo. At least 2 people made it into the plane's wheel well, but they dropped out of the aircraft as it took off. Harrowing cell phone footage showed 2 people falling from the sky as horrified onlookers stared in their direction. The stowaways were given 2 choices when the landing gear folded into the plane: jump or be crushed. So they jumped and they died as a result. But the tragedy wasn't as cut and dry as it seemed. The bodies of the 2 brothers landed on a rooftop at the same time, but the video of the 2 people falling shows one plummeting toward the earth before the other, suggesting that there may have been a third stowaway. And there were human remains found in the plane's wheel well when it landed, indicating that there were even more people trying to escape in the landing gear. One of the victims, a young man named Zaki Anwari, had called his family shortly before falling out of the plane. He told his brother and mother he was going to America, and they begged him to return home. Zaki was too young to have experienced the Taliban's past rule, but the stories he heard and read on social media were enough to prompt his desperate attempt to escape. Another stowaway was a 24-year-old newlywed dentist named Fida Mohammed, who had a thriving new practice in Kabul. But his fear of losing everything when the city fell to the Taliban got the better of him in the end. There were also 2 brothers, Riza and Kabir, who died in the incident. Riza was identified as one of the individuals seen falling from the aircraft. To this day, it's unclear how many stowaways died trying to escape Afghanistan on that plane. 11. Stowaways hop a ride on ship's rudder. An oil tanker called the Alathini 2 departed from Lagos, Nigeria in November 2022, with the crew unaware that the ship had taken on 3 unauthorized male passengers. The men were spotted on the vessel's rudder 11 days later when the Alathini 2 arrived in Spain's Canary Islands. They'd somehow managed to survive the perilous 3,000-mile journey perched on the thin metal section of the rudder that sits above the water, fully exposed to the elements. A Spanish Coast Guard vessel picked the men up and took them ashore at Las Palmas in Gran Canaria for medical checks. Because stowaways are typically the responsibility of a ship's captain, the travelers were put back on the vessel after undergoing any treatment they needed. Sofia Hernandez, a representative for the United Nations Refugee Agency UNHCR, told the Washington Post that it's rare but not unheard of for migrants to stow away on commercial ships. In a similar instance of refugees surviving a ride on a ship's rudder, a teenager from Nigeria named Prince traveled to the Canary Islands with a group of older men in the rudder compartment of a ship called the Ocean Princess 1 in 2020. The voyage took 2 weeks and was miserable, according to Prince, who told El Pai that he and the other travelers had to share a cold, cramped apartment with only enough room for them to sleep in shifts. He said they argued a lot, and when they ran out of food, desperation set in quickly. The stowaways banged on the ship's hull with a hammer, hoping the crew would hear them and come to their aid, but nobody did. Luckily, Prince survived, and he was welcomed on shore in the Canary Islands. 10. An accidental stowaway. A young man named Fahim was playing hide-and-seek with some friends in Chittagong, Bangladesh in early 2023 when he crawled into a shipping container and fell asleep. He woke up along the 2,000-mile journey across the Indian Ocean to Malaysia, but he was locked inside the container and couldn't get out. Fahim spent nearly 6 days in the dark, confined space until a port worker in Malaysia heard him banging on it from the inside. The boy was visibly exhausted and distressed and was crying for food. To make the situation even more terrifying, he didn't speak the local language. He was loaded onto a stretcher and taken to a local hospital, where he received the treatment he needed and was restored to a stable condition. At first, authorities feared that Fahim was a human trafficking victim, but after working past the language barrier, they learned that he ended up in the container during an innocent game and that no foul play was involved. Officials originally planned to send him back to Bangladesh on the ship he arrived on, but they ultimately decided to fly him home. 9. Hidden in plain sight. In early 2023, officers at Harry Reid International Airport in Las Vegas received a notification about a woman on an inbound Spirit Airlines flight from Los Angeles without a ticket or proper identification. Law enforcement was waiting to question her when the plane touched down. The stowaway, identified as 39-year-old Sarah Rice, told FBI agents that she had taken a bus from Colorado to Salt Lake City, Utah, where she snuck onto a Los Angeles-bound flight. She admitted that she'd attempted to sneak onto other flights in the past and that she sometimes got caught but sometimes got away with it. On a previous occasion, she had been caught trying to board a plane to Saudi Arabia. Rice's family confirmed that she has attempted to board both international and domestic flights without a ticket in the past. As a result, she was charged with misdemeanor theft and violating Federal Trade Commission rules. However, she was released from custody later that same day. 8. Creepy clandestine border crossing. In what can only be described as an unconventional method of sneaking across international borders, an Albanian teenager tried traveling to Britain in a small casket in early 2023. French border officials discovered the wooden box hidden among an array of other containers during a routine search of a van near Dunkirk. The coffin was nailed shut and only measured 3.5 feet long, 2 feet wide, and 2 feet high. And yet, the young man managed to cram himself inside. He told authorities that he'd paid £9,000 for the ride into Britain and that he got into the coffin in northern France. The teen said he was in the coffin for at least an hour before the van was stopped and searched. After explaining the situation in court, the young man was released. The driver, Romanian national Lucian Radu Rizai, claimed that he had no idea the stowaway was on board. But he admitted that he was paid £4,000 to transport the coffin without asking any questions, and as a result, he received a 6-month jail sentence. 7. Frozen stowaway free falls to Earth. A Kenya Airways flight from Nairobi was approaching its destination Heathrow in London one day in 2019 when a man fell out of the plane and landed in someone's yard, just feet from where the resident of the home was sunbathing. According to Kenya's Civil Aviation Authority, the stowaway may have been an airline or airport employee, perhaps a security guard, and that he likely had access to otherwise off-limit areas of the airport. He landed so hard when he hit the ground that his body formed a crater and smashed a cement pathway. A witness who came to see what happened after hearing the loud bang of the man hitting the ground told BBC News that the stowaway was frozen like an ice block. It's believed that he was already dead when he fell out of the plane. The London resident who was sunbathing when the stowaway landed was reportedly so traumatized that he could barely speak after it happened, and he left his home later that day to be with his family. Police found food, water, and a bag in the plane's wheel well, but no evidence to suggest who the man was. Shortly after the tragedy, officials reassured the public that they were working diligently to identify him and get to the bottom of the circumstances surrounding his decision to hide in the landing gear compartment. However, authorities still hadn't figured out who he was months afterward, and it's unclear whether they ever did. 6. Stowaway standoff. One evening in 2020, British authorities received a call for help from an oil tanker called the Nave Andromeda, which was seen driving erratically in the English Channel at around the same time the request went out. There were 7 stowaways aboard the ship, who were believed to be Nigerian nationals seeking asylum in the UK, and that apparently threatened crew members who'd ordered them into a locked cabin. According to a statement from the Nave Andromeda's operator, Navios Tanker Management, the captain expressed concern for the safety of himself and his crew due to the stowaways' increasingly hostile behavior. The crew took shelter in the ship's citadel, a secure area on a vessel containing emergency equipment in case of these exact types of situations, while the captain of the ship remained on the bridge. British armed forces descended onto the ship's deck from helicopters and quickly gained control of the situation, ending a 10-hour standoff. These stowaways were subsequently taken into custody, and thankfully, the crew was unharmed. 5. Unfortunate pair flew unnoticed for days. Just days into the 2023 new year, employees found the frozen bodies of 2 stowaways on an Avianca Airlines plane in Bogota, Colombia. The horrifying discovery was made during routine maintenance. Both of the clandestine travelers were young men between the ages of 15 and 20. They had no identification documents, but one of them had currency from the Dominican Republic in his pocket, leading authorities to suspect that the men came from the country. The stowaways also had in their possession a suitcase filled with documents from the Dominican Republic. By the time their bodies were discovered, the aircraft had flown to Brazil, Santiago, Chile, and Bogota. The men were partially thawed when they were found. According to the most recent news updates, authorities were working to identify them. In a statement, Avianca Airlines clarified that its employees thoroughly inspect each plane prior to takeoff, but that airport security personnel are responsible for searching restricted areas. 4. Stowaway survives the impossible. Stowaways, who hide in unpressurized and unheated parts of an airplane, like the wheel well or the cargo hold, have been known to occasionally survive, typically in cases of short, low-altitude flights. But more often than not, stowaways succumb to the lack of oxygen and the below-freezing temperatures inside these spaces. This is why authorities were left scratching their heads when a South African man survived an 11-hour flight from Johannesburg to London in 2015. The stowaway, who went by the name Themba at the time but now calls himself Justin, undertook the harrowing journey with a friend, Carlito Vale, but he wasn't as lucky as his buddy and he passed away. He told The Guardian that the last words he remembered Vale saying were, "We made it." Justin passed out from the lack of oxygen, but had been mindful to wrap his arms around some cables to prevent him from falling out of the plane when the landing gear was deployed at the end of the flight. Vale, on the other hand, fell 1,400 feet to his death. According to Justin, the men studied different types of planes before deciding which one they would try to sneak onto. While many suspect that the pair had help, he insists that they acted completely on their own and gained access to the tarmac by climbing over a perimeter fence. He also conceded that he and Vale weren't fully aware of the danger they were putting themselves in. The next thing Justin remembered after losing consciousness was waking up on the runway in London with a shattered leg. The British government allowed him to stay in the country, and he's since built a new life for himself in Liverpool. 3. Furious father blames staff for stowaway son. A young boy told his mother that he was going to take the garbage out one day in 2013, but he failed to return to his North Minneapolis home in a timely fashion. His parents just assumed he'd gone over to a friend's house, and when he didn't come home later that evening, they figured he'd decided to stay over because it was storming outside. The couple finally began to worry the next morning and started calling around to see if anyone had seen their son. A few hours later, the boy's mum received a phone call from authorities informing her that he was in Las Vegas. Apparently, he'd taken a light rail to the airport and somehow boarded a flight unnoticed. It wasn't until after the plane took off that employees noticed the unaccompanied minor and realized he wasn't on the flight manifest. Police were waiting when the aircraft touched down in Las Vegas. By that point in his life, the young man had already established himself as a problem child. Officials who dealt with him at the airport described him as difficult, and his father admitted that the boy had stolen a refrigerated truck in downtown Minneapolis just days before he snuck onto the flight. The boy's dad seemed more exasperated than anything, telling local station WCCO that his ongoing issues with his son weren't for a lack of trying to get him help. He said he loved the youngster, but didn't know what to do because he feared getting in trouble for imposing heavier-handed discipline in the home. But the father also questioned how airport security didn't notice his son sneaking by, and it's a fair thing to wonder about. For someone to get on a plane without a ticket is a major security breach, and it means that someone is definitely not doing their job. 2. Airport worker attempts to flee. Shortly after, a Swift Airlines flight from Havana touched down in Miami one night in 2019. A man emerged from the plane's baggage cargo area. According to witnesses, someone heard movement in the hold, and another expressed their concerns that perhaps a dog was in there. The stowaway then appeared and clarified that he wasn't a dog. The man was identified as a 26-year-old airport worker from Cuba named Garcia Duarte, and he failed to warn his family about his plan to secretly fly to Miami, according to his father, who spoke with reporters from news channel WTVJ. Duarte garnered sympathy from some fellow Cubans, including Avilio Pumarievo, who told CBS that he came to the US from Cuba in 1961 and that he understood the stowaways' desperation. But federal authorities felt differently. And while Cuban refugees are often allowed into America, stowaways are an exception. A US Customs and Border Control spokesperson said that Duarte had violated federal law and would be processed accordingly. Consequently, he was denied entry into the country and was sent back to Cuba. 1. Teen travels to Hawaii. Authorities were baffled when a teenage boy emerged from the wheel well of a passenger jet shortly after it touched down in Hawaii in 2014. The young man was found wandering the runway at Kaului Airport in Maui in a dazed and confused state. He'd somehow survived a 5-hour flight from San Jose, California in the airplane's landing gear compartment. During the flight, the plane traveled at altitudes as high as 38,000 feet. Temperatures in the wheel well could have easily hit 75 degrees Fahrenheit, and oxygen levels would have been too low for almost any human to survive. Some described the boy's survival as miraculous. Trauma surgeon Dr. Kenneth Stow attributed it to dumb luck mostly, telling CNN that the stowaway was likely in a state of suspended animation. He also attributed the teen's survival to his young age, noting that no adult brain would have survived that. But the youngster may have suffered some lasting health effects from the experience, according to Stow, who said that he more likely than not incurred permanent brain damage. This could come with neurological problems, memory issues, or a lowered IQ. In addition to the teen's unlikely survival of the flight conditions, it was also surprising that he managed to position himself in a way where he avoided being crushed by the landing gear. While it's certainly possible to do so, it's also somewhat of a guessing game to be in the right spot, and the amount of space is limited. The stowaway told authorities that he ran away from home and climbed over a perimeter fence before running onto the plane, bringing only a comb with him. While the young man was cleared of any serious criminal suspicion by the FBI, his ability to sneak onto the plane unnoticed raised major security concerns about operations at US airports. Would you rather have your luggage get lost while en route to what was supposed to be a dream vacation, or spend most of a week-long cruise confined to your cabin for safety reasons due to a group of aggressive stowaways wreaking havoc aboard the ship? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.